Welcome to the live stream on the Wednesday after the championship finale in Abu Dhabi. Lando Norris, the new world champion, Max Verstappen, the winningest driver of the year, and a guest live with us on this stream, Mark Slade, the title-winning race engineer with great experience at McLaren, Mercedes, Renault, and Haas Ferrari. But before we begin, just a look back at Abu Dhabi and on the job that Lando Norris did, particularly when he was coming up to pass Yuki Tsunoda. Classic Lando, actually, in doubt, not doubt, but in moments of decision to go down the inside. I mean, he's a go down the inside driver, isn't he? He's not your sort of born, I'm going to pass this guy on the outside, Max Verstappen, Fernando Alonso type driver, is he? Let's have a look at some other questions now. We'll bring up the browser again and have a look and see what we're doing. Next one is from Sarosh Soman, another of our regulars. Peter, watching the onboards of Prost, he slows the car almost to a halt in the middle of the corners. All he wants is no load on the car when he's accelerating, but it looks so slow, but obviously it isn't. Well, yeah, I mean, I'll hand that over to Mark as well, but I just want to say my little thing there is there was a moment when Alain was going very well at Renault with the Michelin tyres, Renault Turbo, and he was really getting his act together. There was a moment when I said to Frank Williams, I was mate of Frank's, and I was at Zandvoort, and I said to Frank, it was untimed practice, and Frank, come on, let's go out the back and watch. You spend too much time in the garage here. Let's go out the back and watch. And he said, okay, you show me where to go. So anyway, Frank and I walked out to Schivlak, the long, very fast downhill, uphill, then downhill right-hander at the back of Zandvoort. And we were watching away. And Prost came in on a new set of Michelins. And the Renault Turbo, of course, was not allowed engine noise either. Everything was fairly quiet. It was almost, you could hear the tyres above the noise of the engine, particularly through Schivlak. And Prost just went through doing one of his things, just absolutely perfect, like that. And after about 10 minutes, and everybody else is going past, and the Willies went past, and the Ferraris, everything else. Afterwards, Frank said, well, when's Prost going to do a quick lap? Well, I'm not going to stand here forever waiting for him. I said, Frank, he's done his quick lap. He's 1.5 seconds quicker than anybody at the moment. He just couldn't believe it. And that was the way Alain Prost used to drive.
He was just incredibly smooth, was my impression, and he maximised his track position, his line, and minimised his inputs to give as little disturbance to the car as possible. And I think that gave him speed that's not apparent when you're looking at it visually from the outside of the track. That smoothness, because what he's doing is there are obviously disturbances coming in from wind, from track surface, but he was minimising the extra disturbance from his driving the car. So his braking inputs, his steering inputs, his throttle inputs were all incredibly smooth and precise. And so he was just maximising the available grip from the car, avoiding the disturbance, which inevitably costs you some grip if you're very aggressive with the car. Obviously, if the tyres are hard and you're struggling for temperature, then an aggressive driving style can extract more grip. That's a slightly different situation. But with the car that we had then, and I suspect the cars that he drove previously, his pace was down to that precise, smooth behaviour. What I would say is that with the current cars, I think I added that at the time the tyres were much more durable, I believe, than the tyres that we have now, in that they were less susceptible to instantaneous surface overheating. So you have to say it's quite possible that his style would actually be even more applicable to the cars that we have, or the tyres in particular that we have now, because he could probably extract longer duration performance from those tyres, because that is a big problem currently.
Actually, it's quite a good point you make, because when he was at Renault on Michelins, the Michelins actually were worse than the Pirellis have ever been in terms of falling off the cliff. There were races when the Michelins would be very quick for 9 laps and then just absolutely undrivable on lap 10. And if you think about it now, and that was really Prost's grooming period of when he discovered how to be a racing driver. And that's how he grew up, really. And maybe that put him in good stead later on in terms of everything he did and the way he did run and manage tyres. Moving on now to our next question, which is again from Sarosh. Charles Leclerc says that he used to stand out in wet races in junior categories and that was his speciality. He says that none of the Ferraris he's driven gives him any feel in the wet, and it's so difficult to drive. Well, yeah, I mean, he was always fabulous in the wet. I remember seeing him a couple of times in Formula 3 or GP3, whatever it was, and he was really, really good. As you'd expect anybody with that sort of touch and that sort of feel and their ability to drive, to create a huge, by the standards of many drivers, a huge sweet spot around which he can play with all the variables. And he's just got this wonderful feel for the right rotation point. And yeah, he makes a lot of mistakes, and he is a more emotional driver than Max, and he's more emotional than most actually. And he does make errors because he's always pushing it, but usually, not always, but usually the errors are in practice and sometimes Saturdays, not usually the race. I mean, Abu Dhabi was a classic example of a great race by Alain Prost, by Charles Leclerc, I thought. But yeah, I mean, it's a shame, Mark, isn't it, that none of the Ferraris he's driven given him any feel in the wet.
I suspect it's to do with the stiffness that they have to run that car at in order to extract the downforce. From what I understand over the last few years, obviously we had a bit of an association at Haas with Ferrari, and the way the suspension they provided us to use was suspension that wanted to be run very stiff, almost in all regions, which wasn't appropriate to our car. Our car actually didn't need to be stiff. In other words, we didn't gain much downforce by making the car stiffer, which was actually a problem in a way. But at least it meant that our car had a bit of progression, certainly the 24 car, not so much the 23 car. That was just bad in almost every respect. So I do wonder if it's to do with that level of stiffness that they're having to run the car at, and it just makes the car, well, I think they struggle for downforce. I think that the tyres, they have a very narrow temperature range, the Pirelli wets, and small slides can push you over the edge, or you don't get enough temperature. So I think that's another difficulty. And I suspect for him, if a car's very snappy, he probably can't feel the limit of grip. I guess that's what he's feeling about. He's not feeling where the edge of performance is. And on top of all that, the front tyres of the Pirellis is certainly true of the dries, and I think it's probably true to some extent with the wets, is that the front end has very poor lateral grip performance. So it's very difficult to find the balance and the grip on those tyres.
I think it was Miami. He went off on the formation lap for the sprint race. Is that right? In the wet? I think he did. I mean, it was aquaplaning, admittedly, but very unusual to see a driver do that.
And Hadjar in Melbourne, when he went off in the damp, I guess, maybe more to do with inexperience, but I think they are very difficult tyres to drive.
The other problem is that we actually don't have that much wet racing now, do we? And that wet driving. I mean, so from Ferrari's point of view, they're never going to think about a car that's going to be good in the wet. They're only going to think about maximum pace in the dry. Yeah. But it's interesting to hear you talk about the stiffness of the Ferrari setup. And it kind of makes me think of, dare I say, the old days when the ultimate racing car was very stiff chassis, but very compliant, soft suspension. And that applied to road cars, still applies to road cars today, really, Lotus Elan. But it certainly applies to racing cars. And that was Colin Chapman's thing. And today, it's not unlike that, except that instead of having the super stiff chassis, which everybody has, it's now what the perfect compromise, correct me if I'm wrong here, is to have some compliance in the suspension without having to go super low and stiff with the car in order to get the aero. If you got the aero downforce that you require, and you can then run a little bit more compliant and make the car a little bit over curbs, that's nirvana. And that, of course, is somewhere near where McLaren have been this year.
Yeah, it's a compromise, and ultimately, if the track is completely smooth and no curbs, then you would run the car completely rigid, and the only compliance would come from the tyres and any flexing of the suspension, which isn't wanted, but it's inevitably you have some in it. But as soon as you have the odd bump or curb, then you need a degree of compliance to allow the car to absorb that. And that's the balancing act. So you're always basically trying to run the car as stiff as you can whilst balancing against that bumps and the issue of bumps and curbs. And then it depends which range that the bumps are in. So one of the analysis that would be done prior to an event and during an event is where in the speed range the bumps actually are, and you'd be tuning the stiffness, because the stiffness is not linear. You tend to have rising rates for the front and rear suspension through a variety of geometry, and through the springing medium will have probably steps in it, which can be achieved from having torsion bars with multiple steps in them that engage at different points, but also through engaging either bump rubber or Belleville stacks to tune stiffness at different speeds. And that really is what you spend a lot of the time doing, to get the car as low as you can, but without engaging stiffness where you don't want it. And interestingly, the bouncing that you often see, and that we've had Max complaining about a couple of races, and obviously McLaren had a problem with in Vegas, that tends to be the stiffness of the car at high speed. And if you have it too stiff, such that a bump sets off the aerodynamic instability that you get with the car sort of coming down, creating lots of downforce, and then getting too low and that downforce going, then you get into an aerodynamic instability, because it's often triggered by being a bit too stiff at a critical point. And we often used to find that we'd actually have to soften the car off at the highest speed in order to avoid that instability being set up. And if you don't have bouncing, you can actually run the car a bit lower, because obviously if the car's bouncing, you're going through a wider range of ride height, and it could be both lower and higher. So the points where it's low is where it's wearing the skids. So you're actually better off being a bit softer. But it's predicting these things that is one of the main elements that the teams are doing through a race weekend. And obviously, and it seemed like in the last couple of races, Red Bull were probably a bit too aggressive with that, and Max was complaining of bouncing. And then presumably they probably did something like soften it off, or just maybe doing something aerodynamically with their car is the other possibility to reduce that effect, because the floor is going to be much less sensitive to ride height, and you won't get the same instability developing. So yeah, it will help that, and that will mean, it should mean, that the teams are able to run the cars somewhat softer. There will still be an element of gain from ride height, and there are other benefits from being low ride height as well, in terms of center of gravity height being lower, and that's easier on the tires. So they'll still want to run their cars low, but it won't be quite as critical as it was this year, particularly at the rear. The front may still be similar, but it's the rear, it's the sort of middle to rear of the car where it's been super critical in this period.
Great. Well, thanks for all that, Mark's brilliant insight into a very good question, but a relatively straightforward question. And look at the number of layers that Mark was able to uncover there. Just brilliant. Right, next question. Sarosh Soman again. Peter, why did Williams change the driver lineup from 92 to 93? Mansell won the championship in 92. Everything was perfect. What was the need for getting Prost, please? Yeah, well, pressure from, some of it was Frank. He always liked Alain, and he just liked the idea of having a driver as polished as Alain and as cool and as urbane as Alain Prost. Even though Nigel won the championship, I wouldn't have said the relationship between Frank and Nigel was particularly close, in the sense that they were very different sorts of people. Nigel came from Hall Green, Birmingham. Frank was well educated and very early on lived with the Eton and Harrow crowd, and so they were very different in that sense. I'm not saying there was a snobbish thing there at all, but they just weren't that close socially. But I think with Alain, he was French, he was glamorous, he was Alain Prost, but much more importantly, on top of all that, Renault said, we'd love you to run Alain, and Elf said, we'll give you more money if you run Alain. And so it was a bit of a no-brainer from Frank's point of view to run Alain. The problem he had, of course, was that he had Riccardo Patrese in that car, and that was a driver that Nigel really liked and got on well with, a bit like Lewis with Valtteri Bottas, and Nigel was very comfortable with him, and had gone through, and indeed every team he'd driven for in Formula One, it always had a super quick driver in the other car. You know, from day one it was Elio De Angelis, Mario Andretti, and then it was Keke Rosberg, and then it was Nelson Piquet, then it was Alain Prost at Ferrari, and then finally it was Ricciardo, a driver that Nigel really pushed Frank to hiring. And after 1 year there, or 2 years, there was Frank saying, oh no, I'm going to get rid of Ricciardo, I'm going to run Alain Prost. And Nigel had not had a good year with Prost anyway, because Prost had wanted to defend his side of the garage at Ferrari, Nigel obviously his own side, and Nigel had really not enjoyed that year at all. And so Frank actually hired Alain really without talking to anybody about it, and just went ahead and did the deal. And when Nigel found out just before Monza, he said, right, that's it. If he doesn't want me to lead the team again in 93 with Ricciardo, I'm going to go and race and drive for Paul Newman and Carl Haas. And so he did. So really, it was that. And Frank always imagined that Nigel as world champion would stay, and nothing would tease him into leaving the team at all. He just couldn't imagine that he'd want to walk away from Williams, and I think he sort of took that for granted. And of course, misreading Nigel there, and not the first time Frank had thought about, I'm going to have to sort of keep all the balls in the air here, because he always did deals that way. They all did, not only Frank. Colin Chapman, I always remember Chapman when he had sponsorship from, who was it? One of those, Rotary, was it Rotary Watch? One of those funny watch companies. But he, there's no way he wouldn't wear his gold Rolex. So, it was always, oh yeah, hide the Rolex, bring the sleeve down. And, and with Honda, it was, oh yeah, the drivers will wear your caps on the podium, even though he had a contract for drivers to wear Goodyear caps on the podium. And he was always fighting these battles of just trying to do as many deals as he could, all of which overlapped. And having Nigel and Prost in Frank's mind, I think, was just another overlapping problem that he'd dealt with a million times and not really had to face. And so, but it all backfired, really, didn't it? I mean, well, it didn't really, because he won the championship, and Nigel went on to win the IndyCar championship in 93. Amazing, back-to-back championships in Formula One and IndyCar. I doubt that'll ever be achieved. Well, it might be, but it won't be easy, will it? Anyway, thanks for that question. Ruth Taylor. I think Mark's still there. Sorry, Mark, I hogged that one. Peter, you've talked in the past about how teammates work together, and a lot of how they don't work together is what I talk in the past, what I've talked about in the past. I'd like to know if you can tell me anything about the relationship between Emo and Mad Ronald. We're talking here about Emerson Fittipaldi and Ronnie Peterson in 1973, when, I think Emerson handled Ronnie really well, because I think deep down inside, he probably felt, as Mario probably felt, that Ronnie was super, super quick, and it wasn't going to be easy to sort of beat him on a regular basis. But Emerson was just, at that point, Emerson was so good. I mean, he was so professional in everything he did and the way he went about his racing, even though he was only, 24, I think, at the time. And he was just had a very, very mature head on his shoulders. And every time Ronnie did, hang the tail out and the smoke was coming off the left rear going through the Curva del Sol or wherever at Interlagos, Emerson would almost match him, and he wasn't that far away. And often he got the better of Ronnie, of course. And yeah, I think that was a bit of an example of taking points from one another. A very, very good car, that Lotus 72 and 1973, and Jackie Stewart, going through in the very short wheelbase, difficult to drive, darty, ill handling, if you like, Tyrrell, and winning the championship, winning the Drivers' Championship. So yeah, but Emerson never. I think there's a lot of focus these days when you talk about Brazilian drivers on Ayrton Senna, but for me, Emerson was a great driver, and without Emerson, we wouldn't have had the cascade of Brazilian drivers that we had from the late 60s, actually, let alone the early 70s, right up till today. So, you know, we owe Mo a lot. And it was good to see him at, I guess it was Brazil, was he, where he was? Or maybe there was more recently than that, he was somewhere, wasn't he? Still looking pretty good too. Great. Good on him. Right. Next one's JMH0481. Morning, Mr. Windsor. George from Chile here again. Oh, well, hi to you, George, in Chile. Can we say the championship will relax Lando into next season and make him a better driver, less pressure and less mistakes? Thank you, sir. Well, I'll hand over to Mark in a second. I'll just say that I think Lando will definitely relax for sure. I mean, this whole business of the championship and how long it's been going on and the stress of this season and the ups and downs and Oscar blowing him away and then Max doing the charge and mistakes from Lando, all that stuff. I mean, for him, it would just be like, ugh, it's all over. Kind of anticlimactic for him to have to get in the car and do some testing in Abu Dhabi 2 days later, but I suppose that's a good thing. But I think he'll be much more relaxed. And as I said to Cameron, I hope he sort of keeps the fire burning by being a bit different to other world champions and actually going out and doing a bit of other racing. You know, British Touring Car Championship. I'm sure Alan Gow would give him a drive if he wanted to do that in a race or two. Bit of rallying maybe, you know, all these things that you never do on the way up. Oh no, got to be the ultra professional Formula One driver. But now he's world champion and you can do it. Well, go out and enjoy your life. And that'd be one way I would suggest that Lando could actually keep his whole spark going. Because there is a risk that, you know, he might just relax a little bit and somebody like Oscar Piastri in the other car, if the McLaren's a good car, will get better and better now. I mean, that's not necessarily a given, but, you know, Lando, I think, needs to have some other way of keeping it going now. And I think he should just do a bit of other stuff, you know, and he does enjoy rallying. I know he does, and he enjoys racing in general.
Yeah, I mean, you may well be right. I'm sure it comes down to the individual. My only experience was with Mika when he won the championship in '98, and I know that was a huge weight off his shoulders. And at the start of '99, in '99 I think he drove better than he drove in '98 initially. I know there were a lot of problems later in the season with the car, but his driving was unbelievable. In Melbourne, he was absolutely flying in practice. In fact, he pushed it too hard and he crashed in the last corner on the Friday and did a lot of damage to the car. But he came back to the garage giggling. You know, he was just so full of confidence, and he was driving at another level because he knew he'd beaten Michael Schumacher the year before in a pretty tough fight, and he was just full of confidence. And I think we saw a similar thing with Jenson Button, didn't we, when he won in 2009? I think he actually became almost like a better driver. Certainly his time at McLaren was super impressive because he was up against Lewis at the peak of Lewis's powers, and he took the game to him, which I think a lot of people hadn't really expected to happen. So I think it certainly can happen that a driver winning a championship, it releases them to be more confident and more sure of themselves once they have achieved it, and they can concentrate on actually enjoying the driving a bit more. But then maybe more like Nico Rosberg, maybe just the effort of doing that is so much that they just think, geez, do I really want to go through all that all over again? So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. But he's young, and he's certainly, I mean, I've been very impressed with some of the races he did this year. His performance, he would go into a Friday and be unbelievably quick in P1, much quicker than Oscar. And sometimes that edge of performance would dissipate as the other drivers tuned in. But I just thought, well, that just shows that he does have a real natural flair and gift, that he can get in the car straight away and be super fast. So I think that bodes well. I think we could see a flowering of Lando Norris over the next year or two, and he could become an even stronger contender. Be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, there've been many examples. I mean, the Mika example was a very good one. I remember that spin particularly well. I remember thinking at the time, actually, oh, that's what happens if you win a world championship. Bit overconfident there. But there are other examples. I mean, Mike Hawthorne retired, didn't he, when he won the world championship in '58? Just went straight into retirement, partly because he'd lost so many friends, particularly his dear friend Peter Collins that year. And then there's the famous Jody Scheckter one, which was 79 world champion. But where was he in 1980? He kept racing for Ferrari. But not only was the Ferrari a terrible car, but he was blown away by Gilles. And it was a difficult midfield car. But Gilles was just in another planet compared with Jody 80, and to the point where Jody sort of basically retired before the end of the year. You just couldn't do it anymore. But I'm not sure he would have driven that way had he not won the championship in '79.
Absolutely.
So it did have an effect on him, I think. And
the fire had gone out a little bit, maybe.
It kind of depends on how good or bad the McLaren is in 2026. If it's a terrible car, I can't see Lando extending himself massively to beat Oscar every race.
Yeah. I mean, do you think the Jody Gilles situation maybe reflects the Charles Lewis situation a little bit? Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, Gilles was one of the most underrated, still great Grand Prix drivers in my opinion. Really, really quick. I mean, he's everything that Fernando Alonso is today in terms of pace. A different sort of driver for sure in terms of style, but similar in approach and their love of driving and just sheer competitive instinct. I mean, very similar, Gilles and Fernando. And but the thing about 79, 80 was that Gilles was in the running for the championship up till Monza and had a chance to win, still to be in the championship at Monza. Or at Monza, Jody could clinch it if Gilles was cooperative. And Jody persuaded him to do that on the Saturday night of the Italian Grand Prix. He basically said, look, you help me win tomorrow, Gilles, and I'll help you win in 80. Classic thing, what happened to that one? Not that Jody had any chance to help him anyway, because the car was so bad, but that was that thing about, if you have a slight chance of winning the world championship, you never ever play around with it, because it probably only comes around once in your life, and you give it 100%. And that's why I was kind of shocked that Oscar had sort of allowed, or Zach insisted on, Pato O'Ward driving Oscar's car in FP1 in Abu Dhabi in this world championship thing where he was still in the running for the world championship. I mean, what was your take on that one?
I think he just went back to early season planning, where they looked at the tracks where being out in P1 was less important. So in Abu Dhabi, you've got the very hot temperatures, which aren't representative of the sort of sessions that matter, including qualifying and the race. And I think they just planned ahead, and they hadn't thought about the possibility of the championship still being decided at the last race. And I just don't think they thought about it. And of course, by the time they had thought about it, it was too late, because you have to have 4 P1s with a so-called young driver in the car. And there's a certain amount of logistics involved in doing that. And so by the time it became an issue, there wasn't an awful lot they could do about it. So they did 2 with Lando and 1 with Oscar earlier in the season. And in the last sort of 4 or 5 races, there weren't really any races where one of the, missing a P1 was going to be a good thing. So in those races, Abu Dhabi probably still was the least bad option. But I think it just shows that things need to be thought about in a bit more clarity, maybe earlier in the year. But then I suppose you could argue that at those earlier races, say Lando or one of the drivers had missed a P1 in Zandvoort or in Silverstone or wherever they chose to put him in instead, it's still going to be a factor, isn't it? So, but I think psychologically, it was definitely not a good idea for Oscar to miss that session, because he didn't look particularly strong Friday afternoon, although he got better across the weekend. But certainly compared to what we saw with Oscar in Qatar, he wasn't at the same level, was he?
No, definitely not. And all you got to do is think about how, a Max or a Michael or someone like that, or a Fernando even, would have reacted had it been obvious that was what was going to happen in a defining race in the World Championship. How would those guys react to having to give their car up? It kind of all worked out, but there's always a risk of putting a driver in your race car, and it's not as if they've got spare cars in the garage anymore anyway. I just think in a race that important, what did it prove? I mean, Pato would have been completely aware that he had to not hit anything and damage the car, and which really makes the whole test a bit stupid anyway. What's the point of it all?
Yeah, they're just satisfying a regulatory requirement. And I suppose the only question is, if they hadn't done that, they'd just broken the rules, what would have been the consequences? I don't know.
Well, it would only have been a fine, I imagine. And to me, unless it was 3 million or something, I think a fine probably would have been worth paying in that situation. As I say, world championships are priceless and they don't come around very often. And who knows? This may be the one and only chance Oscar Piastri ever has of winning the Drivers' Championship. Who knows?
Yeah,
not that it cost him the championship, but nonetheless, you give it everything you got. You give it 100%.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's have a look now at another comment. This is from Sujo. Greetings from India, Peter. Did you watch the Macau Grand Prix? If so, was there any standout talent you noticed? Shout out to the GB4 champion Araman Bansal for finishing 5th. Well, I'll take your word for that one. Sadly, I didn't know. I was very busy with lots of other stuff. It's probably a fairly feeble excuse, but I was. And to be honest, I was a little bit, I'm one of these guys that thinks that Euro Formula 3 cars, Formula regional cars they're called today, are absolutely perfect for Macau. And now that they're not running those, and now they've gone from, from what we had last year, the sort of current Formula 3 down with regulated wings, and now down to this one because of the engine change, and that was the only thing they can have. I just felt, almost like boycotting it. I shouldn't say that, but I just think it's so easy to get everybody in Formula regional cars again. Why don't we do it and proper drivers in the car? I say proper drivers, have lots of good young guys, but have some guys who are really quick as well, against whom you can pace yourself, and have some stars at Macau. The circuit is that good, the race is that good. It's just kind of a shame that it was what it was this year. Mark, did you take Macau in at all?
I'm afraid I don't really keep up to date with things. I mean, I must admit, even Formula 2 and Formula 3 this year, I didn't pay as much attention as I have done previously, which is a bit remiss of me. But life moves on, unfortunately.
It does, yeah. And the good news is that our man Leo won the Formula 2 title, won it brilliantly in Qatar, and congratulations to him. And Invicta, a great job with the team, which goes all the way back to Russian time, which kind of goes all the way back to ice sport, actually. So great job by those guys. And then Roman Stanek, who was on the pole, I think, in Abu Dhabi, his teammate, also very quick. And a Rob Wilson guy, does quite a lot of work with Rob. So congratulations to him and to Rob, and certainly to Leo. He's got a McLaren deal now. Just hope McLaren make good use of him and he doesn't disappear without trace, like, or indeed end up in a sort of Alex Palou situation, because he's very good, and I hope he really, really gets a real opportunity. Difficult to see how he's going to progress almost straight away into Formula One, but let's hope for the best and see that he does. I think he's a really talented, good guy as well, Leo Fornaroli. Right, where are we now with the browser? Seems to have lost that now. Sorry about that. 1 second. Here we go. Right, back with next question. Another question from Sujo, actually. Peter, the new Ferrari F80 Halo car is known for its optimal hybrid power delivery over a lap at any circuit. The ECU learns the circuit and optimizes the hybrid delivery. Sounds a lot like the 2026 Formula One regulations. Yeah, well, I don't know too much about that. I'm interested to know whether Mark knows anything about supercars as well, and whether that's one of his things. But yeah, I mean, those cars are just ridiculous now. I was at the Nürburgring in August, and the DRS was opening magically from a GPS signal from a satellite as I go down the straight. I mean, what's that all about? This is road cars in a world in which we're all supposed to be worried about global warming and saving the planet. And here we are. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think about all that Ferrari F80 Halo car?
I don't know much about the road car, but that technology of learning the lap is what the current cars do, the F1 cars do. And it's a problem, actually. I used to be advised by the Ferrari guys that, if a driver did something different on a lap, significantly different on a lap, it could have consequences for the power delivery on the subsequent lap. So it was one of the complications of, say, a wet qualifying session, or if you're doing fast, slow, fast in practice, that has to be thought about and managed, because it can have consequences for how the car, how the power or the energy is deployed around the subsequent lap. So it's something that it sounds like it's something that Ferrari have taken from their Formula One experience and applied to a supercar. You can't stop progress in terms of technology. Oh God, I can't even say the word. Technological understanding. It's always going to move forward. but obviously rules could be in place to limit it. I don't have a huge problem with the way things are at the moment. The move to more electrical input next year, whilst I don't have a problem with the concept of using more electrical power, I think it's interesting that they've chosen to take off the most efficient part of the energy recovery system, which is the MGUH. That is the clever bit that makes the current cars so phenomenally efficient. And as I understand it, next year's cars, even though they will use more electrical power around the lap, they'll actually use the same amount of fuel, because the drivetrain will not be anywhere near as efficient as the current cars because of the loss of the MGUH. And I think that's a bit of a shame. That's backwards technology, in my opinion.
I think that's more than a shame. That's ludicrous, isn't it? Really, what's the point of it all?
Well,
you're not saving fuel at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about?
It's been done because Audi didn't want to develop an MGU8, basically, and the FIA and F1 were desperate to get another engine manufacturer involved, which, in my opinion, isn't really. I'm not sure it was worth it because they've lost Renault in the process. Not that Renault did a particularly brilliant job, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons. But that's what's happened.
Right, but I mean, again, if you look at the range of Alpine road cars now and where they're going, it's a shame, isn't it? Because there is quite a serious, tie there now, really.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting, isn't it? In my opinion, Renault have always done a good job of producing road cars with a sporting aspiration. If you think back to the Meganes and the Clios of the past, the RSs, I think they produce very good sporty cars. I'm not sure that they promoted them brilliantly, but I thought there was a good connection between the road car side and the race car side. And we're losing that from Renault, unfortunately. I think it's a real shame that a company with the history of Renault, they are a company that has supported Formula One significantly over the last 40, 50 years. And but through a lot of it is their own fault, to be honest, in the way that they've handled themselves. But I think it's a real shame that we're losing them and that we're downgrading the technology in the sport in order to accommodate another company that, well, we'll see how they get on. But Volkswagen Audi Group haven't been huge supporters of Formula One up until this point. So it just seems a little bit odd. But just coming back to the original point, as I said, I don't have a problem with using more electricity because it makes sense to some extent. But the way it's been done is, I would say, somewhat dubious. And the whole, I suppose what we were talking about was the power deployment and the way the cars learn around the lap. And some people would say, oh, yeah, but that takes away from the driver. But I don't think it does really, because it's not something that the driver should really be having to think about. So the fact that that's all done automatically to optimize performance, to my mind, is just that's an engineering challenge. And I actually think that's pretty cool, pretty good. And I actually think that should be something that should be talked about more. I mean, the cars technologically used to be a lot more complicated in terms of active ride and power brakes that we used to have. And I think there's a certain element of making Formula One cool through the use of technology. So I'm personally not a fan when those things get downgraded, shall we say.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I wish we were still at V10s and burning lots of rubber. That's just me. It's not that I don't care about the other side of the equation. I just think Formula One should have adopted Formula E as a sort of support event, a bit like Academy, and that should have been on the race card for the last 5 or 6 years. And Formula One teams should have been helping the development of the Formula E cars, but not at the expense of the Grand Prix cars, which should be noisy and spectacular and the big business. But that never happened because of the punch up between Bernie and Jean Todt over Bahrain. But going back to your point about Renault, you make a very good point about Renault, and it's of course not only recently, they won the first ever French Grand Prix, going back to the turn of the 20th century.
Yes. Yeah, 1906.
Yeah, exactly. And you think about the Renault brothers, and how innovative they were, and how they built that car in a shed in the bottom of the house on the outskirts of Paris, and lost one of the brothers was killed, Marcel, and I think it was the Paris-Barcelona road race. And despite that, they continued to develop it. So forget Ferrari. Renault's history in Formula One is greater and deeper than any other manufacturer. So it's a great shame that they're not doing an engine from here on. And I hope the Alpine team sort of continues with some sort of Gallic character, because France has got such an important role and has played such an important role in the history of Formula One. And of course, you've worked for that team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and whilst it, effectively it's the old Tolman team rebranded a number of times up to that point, there was definitely a strong element of Renault through it. Not least from the engine guys that we worked with. That whole team was French, and it was a pleasure to work with them. But the sad fact was that the technological side of their output had been degraded, basically when we went to the V8s. When the V8s were supposed to be a sort of fixed engine for 2006 onwards, I gather that a lot of the strong people that were at Viry basically were sacked, and the company was reduced in size on the basis that they weren't going to have to do any more engine development and save money. And of course, engine development did actually continue through the V8 period, and to be fair, they still did very well. But it was really when we went to the hybrids that it exposed the weakness that they were left with. That they just didn't have the resources to deal with that well. And the fact is that their hybrid engine was never a match for the better units for a number of reasons. But I suspect a lot of it was to do with resources. But it was always an engine that the batteries were too heavy and the engine was too heavy, and it just didn't have the input and the development that other teams were able to put into it, or other engine manufacturers. But that was a choice that Renault made, unfortunately. But I do think it was very sad. So on the technical side, that team lost a lot of personnel, basically at the end of the Lotus period, when the money dried up from the company that actually owned the team. And the facilities weren't developed very strongly, or hardly at all, in fact, for a period of 4 or 5 years. And I think they went from a team that had a pretty decent wind tunnel and an extremely good bunch of aerodynamicists, a lot of whom went to other teams, including Mercedes, and were involved in the success of Mercedes afterwards. And the teams just they've never recovered from that, because they became an unattractive place for people to go to. So I'm afraid the talent just didn't head in that direction. And whilst there are some very good people there, don't get me wrong, but it as a company, it's just missed out on, in my impression is, it's missed out on 10 years of effectively keeping up the development pace. And so it's very hard to recover that. And maybe with a new project, they can recover from that to some extent. But the reality is that the teams that are going to do best next year are the teams that have the best current resources and have been doing the best job over the last 2 or 3 years. So there is no real reason why the overall competitiveness of the teams should change dramatically, unless someone's come up with something outstandingly clever. And I personally think that's more likely to come from Aston Martin and Adrian Newey than it is from the current Alpine team, if at all. And in actual fact, quite a few of the people that were in the technical department when I was at Renault/Alpine have gone to Cadillac as well, because I guess working with Nick is something that they've wanted to continue. So I think there has been a bit of an exodus of people has continued over time. When I was there, you always wondered what Renault actually wanted out of that team. It was never clear what the point of the team actually was. And never, when I was at McLaren, you always felt the point of that team was to win races and win the World Championship, and that, particularly when Ron was in charge, he would do whatever was necessary to provide the team, the technical team, provide the drivers to make sure that team was at the front line. And it was a powerful feeling for the members of the team to have when you felt that that was the support within the team behind you. And when at Renault, whilst everyone in the team, in the people I worked with, all were desperate to win and were racers, you did not feel that the point of that team was to go out and win races and win the championship. You just didn't get the strength of support from the upper management. That was the point. So
Briatore should be doing now. Whether he is, of course, is a matter of some debate.
And I always felt that Renault's commitment somewhat lacked, sadly, in the later stages.
I mean, are you happy doing what you're doing, or do you think you're going to end up working in F1 again at some point?
I doubt it. I don't think it fits in with where I want to be anymore in terms of mindset. I did it from. I mean, I joined McLaren in late 1991 and left Haas at the end of 2024. So that's quite a long period of time. And whilst I love the sport, and in fact, I have to say, doing these shows, this stuff with you has actually rekindled my interest in the details. But what I like is actually being more interested in what all of the grid is doing rather than just the specific focus. And I think, the whole pressure, the stress of it, and the travel and all of those things, there just comes to a point in your life when you sort of think, actually, I don't really need this anymore. I'd actually like to enjoy the sport more for what it is. Yeah.
Very, very fortunate to have your input on a regular basis, Mark. Thank you so much. Isn't Mark brilliant? What a great guy. We're so lucky to have him in this stage of his life, and he can give us so much great stuff, so many insights. Just wonderful. Okay, going back to iRacing Aussie now. Here we go. Everything's back to normal now. I hope everybody can hear me. No more thumbs downs, lots of thumbs up, I hope. Peter, thank you for a truly remarkable year for your channel. Thank you very much, mate. I wouldn't describe it as that. I thought you were going to say, Max or Lando or whatever. But anyway, thank you very much. We're all here because we love your analysis and understanding of the great history of Formula One. Have a fabulous Christmas with the family. That's very sweet of you. Thank you very much, iRacing Aussie. And you have a great iRacing weekend and Christmas and holiday period as well. Very envious of you being in Australia. When I was traveling to all the races, I always used to make a point of going to Australia for the winter, the European winter, and enjoying the Australian summer, the tennis, the golf, and a few other things, the surfing. But now living in Spain with the family, I mean, I can't believe the number of golf tournaments Jack's got coming up, my son. That all happens in the winter in Spain, and so, or here in our part of Spain anyway. So flat out over the winter, flat out. Also got I've got a couple of movie projects on the go, but not actually going, if you see what I mean. Usual old story. But they say, these things take a long time, don't they? If they happen instantly, they're never going to work, are they? And then what else? We got something else. Oh, a bit of property stuff going on. Yeah, it's a bit boring. Anyway, more about that when we can. What are Jack and I? We're planning to go to the Swedish Rally in February, and we might do some sort of road trip at some point as well, I think. So anyway, good. I'm rambling on. Thank you very much for that one, iRacer. Working. Reeve85. If you're putting together a team for next year and you had to choose a number one driver from the current drivers on the grid, how many drivers would you consider before taking Norris? That's a shame, isn't it? I think somebody asked me in the middle of the year about my perfect driver pairing, and I think I said Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, didn't I? Yeah, I think I did. So I'll stick with that. I mean, Charles was quicker, isn't he? So he's my number one, but I'd love to have Lando in the other car, and he wouldn't be a number two. He'd be a sort of number 1.5, wouldn't he? Or not 0.2, 1.2, really. So Yeah, I mean, Lando's very good. Underestimate him at your peril, as I've said several times. But he's not Charles Leclerc, and he's not Max, and he's probably not quite as quick as George, and he's probably not quite as quick as Oscar when Oscar's on it. But he's Lando, and he did what he did, and he managed to meet Zach when he did and persuade Zach to do what he did. And I know a lot of money was involved, but nonetheless, he had the confidence in Zach to do that. And he was a part of this whole McLaren team that we know and love today, which, produced this car. So, don't be too harsh on Lando, but I would love to work with Charles Leclerc, and I'd love to work and just see how he works as a driver and get the best from him, and obviously, try to understand the way he thinks and maybe try to get him to be a little bit less emotional from time to time and be a little bit more clinical about his racing. But I think it'd be a great, very interesting driver to work with. I think it's more to do with interest, providing they got the basic raw mega talent. They're always fascinating people. That's why I love working with Nigel for so long, because he had this basic talent, and you knew that ultimately, whatever car he was in, he was going to get about 99.9% out of it in any given lap. But then there were all the other things that were interesting about Nigel, and that's what basically 10 15 years of my life just went like that, because it was 10 15 years of intense working very closely with Nigel to get him into Formula One, and then when he was in Formula One, try to help him be in the best car and the best team. And when it all happened, it was a great feeling, I got to say. But yeah, Nigel, and would still, drivers like Nigel, Carlos, you always knew something was going to happen with those guys because they're so good. And the driver has to have that sort of basic DNA for me to get really fired up about him. But I'd love to run Charles, no doubt about that. Sound's gone again, sound's gone, sound's back, sounds good. I don't know I really don't know what's going on with the sound there. I was actually flicking from Mark's channel back to mine relatively seamlessly with the sound working okay, but why it kept stopping initially, I've no idea. I don't suppose anyone will ever know. Dustin Hudson, thanks Mr. Windsor for your insight and experience, love your show. Thank you very much. So we're talking about this is quite early on. Mark, sorry about that. Exalash says Hamilton and Bottas at Cadillac, Leclerc and Perez at Ferrari. Yeah, well, Hamilton and Bottas would be a better way of starting that Cadillac team, actually, wouldn't it? It'd be a pretty good way of doing it, and it's not. And Leclerc and Perez would be a very good team. Actually, Leclerc and Sainz would still be the better team, wouldn't it? Ivan Borg, hi Peter, good to catch you live. You mentioned a few live streams ago that you're working on some film projects. Are they documentaries? Yeah, they're documentaries, but not just talking heads and archive footage, a bit more than that. So yeah, I can't really say too much more at the moment. It's the only reason I can't say too much is because these things, that'll be good, we'll do that, and then it takes 6 months to get that done, and then this contract needs to be signed, and then that done, and it takes forever, and you can't really talk about anything until everything's signed and agreed and you're going forward, and it's not yet, and none of them actually may happen, so no point in talking about them really. A shame. Axelash again says, bring back fastest lap point. Did sprints have a point? I don't think they did, no. I don't think they did. But do we want to bring back fastest lap? Why did they get rid of it, actually? I can understand that it was nonsense for some back marker to go into a set of soft tyres 2 laps from the end of the race and get a point. But once they confined it to having to finish in the top 10, in other words, be a point scorer in the race, to be eligible for the fastest lap point, that made quite a lot of sense to me. I think it's a bit of a shame they stopped that. Maybe too many sets of tyres were getting used and Pirelli got annoyed. So, not sure. I think they should bring it back, actually. I think they should. But it was the fastest lap that actually ultimately lost Sterling the World Championship in 58. He thought they put out a sign saying Haw Rec, which was supposed to mean Mike Hawthorne's just set a new lap record, i.e. fastest lap, and has therefore got the point. They gave it to Sterling, thinking that Sterling would then react to that and go quicker. And Sterling misread it and thought it said Haw Reg, R-E-G, meaning Hawthorne's just running regularly around the track and not doing anything spectacular and not going very quickly. So he didn't respond. So, yeah, okay, you wouldn't have that lack of communication today, would you? But, yeah, I think it's a good thing. For the top 10, I think it'd be quite good. Bring it back. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, everybody talking about the sound and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I apologize. Bear with me next time we do it. And I'm going to try and do a live guest every live stream. Most of them will be Mark. I'll try and get Scarbs in, get him out of bed at some point. Dear old Scarbs. I'm only joking. I've never known anybody work harder than Scarbs. Quickly got to say that. And we'll get some Scarbs on the show as well and some other people. And we'll see where we go. Mr. Cudless. Peter, yesterday you said to Cameron that it's weak for Lando to say he wants to be a good person first and a Formula One driver second. When Tommy Fleetwood said the same thing, he's a gentleman. I didn't say that. I said he was probably misquoted. And if you listen to my initial reaction when we were talking about that, which was the week that article came out, I said something along the lines of course, wanting to be a better human being is the most important thing in your life, regardless of who you are and what you're doing. That's the goal of life, is to be a better person every day and to grow as a human. What I said was, well, if it didn't come out that way, this is what I would have meant, is that some people might think he was weak if he said that. But the reality is he's a good person and we should accept that for what it is. And I've always said that about Lando. So either I didn't say it very well, or you misheard, or you only heard a small part of it, because I would never say that it's weak for anyone to want to be a good person and for that to be their priority in life. I don't think it was very clever for a journalist to try to get a driver to say that, because it could come back to bite him. And as I said before, I think you got to look at whether this quote of Lando's was out of context or way the question was formulated. Because if you said to somebody, in the overall view of life, in terms of life and death and your family and loved ones you may have lost or loved ones you may cherish, how important is being a good person and living a good life compared with being a good Grand Prix driver? I think everyone would say, oh, it's much more important to be a good person, wouldn't they? Equally, you could rephrase the question the other way around and get him to say what you want him to say. So that's all it. But I don't, I'm just reading your next question. Oh, the Tommy Fleetwood. Yeah, well, Tommy Fleetwood said the same. He's a gentleman. Yeah. Well, I think Lando's a gentleman, to be honest. So I can't speak. I don't know much about Tommy Fleetwood. He seems a really nice guy, very good golfer. Eventually, now he's got his just desserts, so good on him. But I don't know much about him at all. But I do know Lando a little bit, and I think he's a really good guy. What can I say? I'm glad he wants to be a better human being, and good luck to him. He should be. We all should be. So yeah, the Prost thing. It was quite early on, all these questions, but we got him to say. We got Mark to talk about Prost, and you heard everything he said when the sound wasn't working. So, Jules Clark, how much has Oscar been harmed, reputation damaged due to Lando winning? Is this acceptable due to their differences in experience? Well, to be honest with you, I don't think Lando winning the championship actually is going to hurt Oscar at all, because there have been a sufficient number of incidents where Oscar and or his supporters can say, well, if they hadn't done that for Lando, I could be world champion. If this hadn't happened, that hadn't happened, I could be world champion. If Pato hadn't been in my car, FP1, I might have done a better job. There's a million things you could say, I think, to mitigate Lando winning the championship, not the least of which is the first corner in Singapore in Oscar's mind and the mind of Oscar supporters. And so I think as long as you've got those very specific things you can point to, you don't have to say, oh, Oscar lost it. He lost the championship. He's going to be depressed. I don't think he will be at all. I think he will think about the things that didn't go right for him, that weren't in his control, and try to do a better job of making sure those sorts of things are in his control from here on in. R.I.P. Gilles, yeah, wonderful. I miss Gilles a lot. Great guy, very good friend, and wonderful racing driver. Ivan Borg, no use crying over spilt WDC points, but Lando winning over Max left me with a bad taste. The points Oscar gave up in Monza ended up making the difference, by the way. Yeah, they did. They did between Lando and Oscar, really, but you can't really include Max in any of that. Of course, they made a difference in terms of overall totals, but then again, as I say, you know, the tyre choice made by Red Bull in Spain at the restart at the end made the difference. Kimi Antonelli taking Max out of the Austrian Grand Prix on lap 1 made the difference. I mean, where do you draw the line? I always highlight the Spanish one because it wasn't the first lap and it wasn't a team orders thing. It was a strategy call where the race had really been run and Max was top 3. And they managed to blow it by putting him on hard tyres when everybody else is on softs. That was a ludicrous thing, totally beyond Max's control. And that should never have happened. D. Heb, hi Peter, long-time listener and a bit big fan of your depth of knowledge. Thank you very much. Would you or Mark know anyone who could be considered the next Newey? Would be interesting to know. Well, I mean, right now, you got to say Rob Marshall's doing a pretty good job overseeing everything that's going on at McLaren, and he is a bit of a Newey clone is the wrong word. I would say he would see Adrian as a bit of a mentor, and that's a very good thing, isn't it? And so Rob, I mean, he's not an aerodynamicist in the way Adrian Newey is an aerodynamicist, but he has a very good feel for the overall production and feel for the car, and he's a racer. So Rob is definitely one of them. I mean, Pete Prod, who's also at McLaren, is an Adrian Newey disciple, if you like, an aerodynamicist, pure and simple, and has obviously done a very good job on that McLaren as well. So you'd have to look at those two in combination as being potentially, if you put Rob Marshall and Pete Prod together and took them anywhere, they're probably going to do a pretty good job, in the same way that wherever you put Adrian, he's going to do a pretty good job with the team of people that he brings. So I would say you probably need 2 people to equal 1 Adrian, but if you're going to take 2, it would be Rob and Pete. TB7530 says, an electric F1 series. And then he's got, Grizzle and teeth gnashing, and I totally agree with him. Terrible. Electric cars, Dustin Hudson, no electric lighter cars, better racing. Renault made the top 80s, 90s hot hatches. Well, more than that. I mean, I had a Megane Turbo, Trophy Turbo, which was a great car and loved it. It was a sort of Lotus Cortina of the 2020s. And, it's 2020s, I guess. And it was early 2020s. Just very quick car. And that's the car that I drove, that Fernando Alonso drove me in around a couple of laps of Ricard one year. And he loved it as well. It's just a really good car. So they made great cars. I had a Renault, what did I have? A Laguna Williams edition when I was at Williams, which was very good as well. And of course I had a Clio 16 valve as well. Yeah, I loved them all. Renault always made, Renault 5s were really good. I mean, I love Renaults, and I love the whole Alpine thing. And I liked it when they were closely associated with Amedeo Gordini as well. And the whole Renault V6 Formula One engine, which was born of the sports car engine, the 2-litre sports car engine that Jean-Pierre Jabouille and Patrick Depailler and others used to such great effect in Formula 2. And then they converted it to 1.5 litres and it became the Formula One engine. That was basically always known as the Renault Gordini engine. So they've got great history, Renault. And it's so sad that they're becoming, the way they are now, really. Ivan Borg, dreading the 26 rules, utterly pointless. With hindsight, developing a carbon-neutral drop-in fuel would have been better for the planet and the show. Paddy Lowe was working on it. Yeah, well, absolutely, totally agree. I mean, all this business about catering for Audi, and then as a result, the internal combustion engine is actually going to use more fuel than the current one. It's less efficient. It's just ridiculous. It's politics, and it's getting everything the wrong way around, in my opinion. And as I said, from day one, Formula One should never have really gone away from V8s and V10s. And they were cheap, they were reliable, it was great racing, great sound, and all of the Save the Planet, all of that Save the Planet effort should have gone into starting up a Formula E academy, if you like, in which the Formula One teams had a technical input to various teams that were associated with them, and the Formula One drivers maybe did guest appearances once a year at various races in electric cars, part of the Formula One race card over a race weekend. But the Grand Prix itself should always be, a proper show. But instead of which they went with this sort of compromise, which is becoming an even worse compromise now. TB7530, he agrees, no French or German Grand Prix on the Formula One calendar is blasphemous. Yeah, well, I don't know about blasphemous, but it's definitely completely inappropriate given the history of both those countries. And in Formula One and Grand Prix racing and Grande Preuve, Formula One began a long time before 1950. And it was there was various formula. One of them was Formula One. The World Championship point scoring system began in 1950, and it's wrong to say Formula One began in 1950. It didn't. And France and Germany, wow, without them, where would we be today? We wouldn't be where we are. That is for sure. And when World War II was over, where did it all restart again? The Bois de Boulogne and the Boulevard des Anglais in Nice, in France. That's where it started again. Okay, public road racing was not allowed in too many other countries, but it certainly was allowed in France, and they went for it. And in England, we had the old airfield circuits, and they were pretty good, but not. It wasn't the same, was it? Without the French, nothing would have been as it is today. So really, a lot of time for them. A lot of time, just adjusting things. I've got this cool new thing I can use. I keep playing around with it, trying to get better quality pictures. There you go. Bit more oomph to the question, to the picture, as my mum would say, used to say. Don't tell me I've killed the box again. No, I haven't. Here we go. Bring it down. This is this chat that I have. I don't know how many other people actually have this chat as we do it on our live streams, but I think it works pretty well. So this somebody disagrees. This Ara Perara, Paul Ricard not being a racetrack on the calendar is the best thing that ever happened. He's talking to TB7530. Well, yeah, I mean, you probably know the Ricard. You're talking about the Ricard at the moment, but the Ricard of 1971, when it was first opened, it was this incredibly futuristic circuit and that big thing with Paul Ricard. Nobody knew what Paul Ricard was at that point, apart from the French. And there they were, this futuristic Grand Prix circuit with all this runoff area and blue skies down by the south coast of France in the mountains there. Just absolutely gorgeous. Everybody loved it, and I loved it. And the number of French Grand Prix I went to, I just thought this is the greatest race on the calendar, because the road from Ricard back down to Bandol is nothing but sweepers and hairpins and downhill, uphill, really good road. And then down in Bandol, you've got these wonderful hotels, and it was right on the coast, and it was the summertime, and we had the Ile Rousse Hotel, and all the elf people were there, and you go out and play tennis with Patrick Tambay, and then go and have a limonade with Jean-Pierre Jabouille and Jacques Lafitte in the bar, and then you'd go and have dinner outside, watching François Sévère and a few others playing boule on the beach or whatever. He's telling me it wasn't a good race? Why don't you want Ricard on the calendar? Oh, you guys, you don't know that Ricard. Oh, well, what can I say? And then somebody else saying, well, Ricard's just a test circuit. I'm referring to Magny-Cours. Oh, well, I love Magny-Cours as well. Another great circuit. But, of course, when Bernie bought Ricard, it hadn't been used for a long time. He bought it and he called it the high-speed test track or something, didn't he? And he took a bit of turf from Gatwick and put it in the front, and I don't know, did some other things, but I don't know. Peter's inaudible when he asks questions. Don't tell me that was inaudible now. I don't know. I can't, I'm just going to have to see what's going on. We can't hear Peter when he's not on screen. Yeah, well, that's all right. We can only hear audio from the person on screen. Well, that's good input. Thank you. I didn't know that. I didn't know I couldn't chat to Mark off screen. Okay, I can remember to do that. I will. I'll get that for the future. But I think overall, as a first try, this wasn't too bad, was it? We had a good hour with Mark, and I think his audio then was good, and the picture was good, and everything worked, which has never happened before. So it'll only be better next time, everybody. So stick with it. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. This is from Yassine9593. Who do you think will be the front runners for next season? That's a good question. Well, yeah, I mean, we think about it a lot, don't we? I think Aston Martin will be the team that'll come up in a way that everybody will be surprised, probably. And Fernando could potentially win the World Championship next year. I think there'll be a good engine from Honda, and I think it'll be a well-run team and a good car from Adrian Newey. So I think Aston will be... I'd say Fernando's definitely going to be one of the major runners next year. You can't exclude McLaren for the reasons Mark was saying, that they've got so many strong foundations now, building blocks, that it's hard to imagine they're not going to have a decent car next year. Mercedes will do a good job with the power unit. So that McLaren factory Mercedes balance will probably be about the same, I would imagine. Interesting to see how Alpine get on alongside Williams, whether they suddenly are up there with Williams with Mercedes power. Pierre Gasly, I think, is very, very quick and should not be underrated at all. What else? Ferrari. Easy to say it's going to be the same as this year, isn't it? But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they can't get any worse. They can only get better. So maybe they'll be okay and they'll be in there somewhere along the line. And then there's Red Bull with, and obviously Racing Bulls as well, with the Ford Racing Bull technology engine overseen by Phil Prue, who's a contemporary of Mark's actually at McLaren. And Phil's a good guy as well and very calm, will do a good job there. How competitive that engine will be, I mean, it's hard to imagine they'll be as good as the Honda. I imagine they'll be as good as the Merc, but I may be wrong. So I don't know. And my only question in my mind really is a driver like Max or Charles, let's say just Max, who's as good as Max and has all those extra little bits that he does that makes him better than a Lando or an Oscar or even a Charles. Will those extras actually allow him to express himself in the 26 cars? I've got no idea. My gut feeling and my fear is that the racing will be so dominated by active aero and power energy harvesting and all that rubbish that a driver like Max and the finesse that he has will kind of be swamped by all the other stuff and just running the car well. And that's the case. I don't think that's a step forward at all, because for me it's about drivers and it's about driving. And if a driver like Max can't display his additional talent, then then there's something wrong with the formula. We'll see. We'll see. You know, I don't think anyone knows yet. I'm sure Max doesn't know what it's going to be like. Yeah, Darth JF, speaking of rally, what do you think of Rovan Perez switching from rally to track racing? Got a lot of respect for him for doing that, and I think it's wonderful and that he's doing that. And he's not just going, you know, into touring cars or something. He's going into one of the most competitive and difficult series on the planet, which is Japanese Super Formula. And you know, I think it's good because he's putting himself under massive pressure there. And he knows that if he doesn't succeed in Japanese Super Formula, i.e. win 2 or 3 races or be right there or thereabouts, then there's no point in going much further. And I think I really respect him for that decision as well. A really difficult series, new tracks, well, everything's new for him, but even if you're coming from Europe, from say Formula 2, Super Formula is a really difficult series. So to go straight there from rallying is going to be unbelievably steep mountain to climb. I think in his mind, he's going to do Formula 2 in 2027 with high tech, which is good. And I think he's got Toyota backing all the way. And that's a great thing as well, to know that he's not going to have to worry about funding and how good is the team. Toyota are going to place him in good teams in good places, and Toyota strengthening their links now with Haas. So if things go well, he can get into a Haas Formula One car, probably have a Toyota engine by then, who knows. And so he's got a direct path, and that's a good thing as well. But yeah, a lot of changes in rallying, aren't there? Because Ott Tanak has retired as well, and he's left Rally 1. They say he might come back, but at the moment he's not there. So Hyundai had to fill that third seat. And they did that. They've done that very well, I think. And they're sharing it between Danny Sordo. No surprise there. I mean, he's been around a long time. He's very good, very consistent, Spanish driver, does well, fits in very well with the team. So he's going to do a third of the races. But the other 2/3, interesting choice. And I'm totally rapt that he'd gone for both of them. One, Issa-Pekka Lappi. I've always been a fan of Issa-Pekka, and I'm so pleased he's got that opportunity. I'm sure he'll be in the sort of snowbound rallies. He'll probably do Sweden and a few others, Monty maybe. And then the other driver, I'm really chuffed about this, is Hayden Paddon. If anybody deserves a chance now in Rally 1, it's Hayden Paddon, after everything he's done in Rally 2 and how he, European Rally Championship, how he dominated that. This last year he's been in domestic events, New Zealand and Australia, dominating those. And now for Hyundai to say, right, Rally 1 car, Hayden, I think it's just brilliant. Such a good choice. Really, really pleased for him. Then, of course, Ollie Solberg will be regularly in the Rally 1 Toyota next year. So all looking pretty good in rallying. And, but Rovan Perra, yeah, full marks to him. I'm going to follow his interest, follow his racing in Super Formula with great interest. Every race, going to look at it and see where he qualified, what went, what not. Try and give all that info to you guys as well. So, yeah, it's a great series, Super Formula. Actually, I was just watching some old reruns of Super Formula this morning when Ross Cheever was winning everything. That guy was so quick. But it was quite funny. I was talking about the starting lights the other day and how Nigel used to watch the red light going out more than, he'd really stare into the middle of the bulb and he could sort of see the bulb start to fade before the light had actually gone out. And watching those starts then from that era, it was just like red to green like that. And it makes you think, why did they bother having a green? Why did they just let the reds go out? Because the green came on as the red went out. What did they watch? The red going out or the green coming on? I'm sure they all did the Nigel thing and watched the reds going out, but you never know. WCR Movies. Hi there. Hi, Peter. Hello from chilly Norfolk. Yeah, well, Norfolk, great county of England, home of Snetterton and Lotus, of course. I hope you have an amazing holiday season. Looking back, what were your standout races of 25? Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka, I think. Max just showing who was boss from the pole onwards. That was it was a wonderful race, and he drove it so well too. I think the McLaren was a better car that day, but he won it. I think George winning Singapore was pretty amazing. That nobody really understood what was going on there, least of all George probably. But that was an evening to remember in many ways. And how McLaren managed not to win that race in the first corner was a decisive first corner in terms of Oscar Piastri's World Championship challenge. It all kind of changed after that, and that was a decisive race, decisive win. Max in Brazil, you've got to say that every year, haven't you? And Max in a lot of places. I think, to give him credit, Lando in Brazil as well, because he was definitely on top that weekend and he deserved to win that race. And it was a difficult circuit and he got the best from the car, from himself and from the team, and did a really, really good job. So enjoyed that. I mean, Silverstone is always an edgy race for me, and in my mind, because it's an edgy circuit. It's a bitty circuit. Some slow, some fast. It's never been a flow to Silverstone, and the race was like that. All that business with the safety car and the weather and everything. I just found that a bit annoying. I don't know. So many races, 24, hard to choose, but there are some that stand out, I think. Gregory Stevens H. What do you think of rumours Ferrari will be behind even after giving up 25 due to poor PU? Did they give up 25? I think a lot of people love this thing about, they've given up development, just keep the car out there. But nobody was doing any development towards the end of the year anyway. The last bit of proper development was Red Bull's floor for Monza. And so, I don't think they gave up. They just didn't know what to do, is the answer. And you can improve the car, as Red Bull did. But Ferrari don't know. That is the problem, or didn't know what to do. And I don't think they do even now. So, power unit. I think their power unit was not too bad this year, but next year there are obviously people are saying, you know, they could be in big trouble with the power unit next year, but easy to say that. And I'm sure that's what 99% of us all think, but let's wait and see. We just don't know, do we? We just don't know. As if the, you know, that F80 thing is definitely able to compute the race perfectly in terms of its usage of power and energy, then Ferrari may have a massive advantage. Who knows? There's a super chat, Connor Babel. Hi Peter, thank you for being the goatiest Formula One mind to ever go to. Just sound like Hamilton now. Thank you so much. Sorry, Cameron, I should say. Hamilton. Oh, Lewis Hamilton saying that? No, I don't think he would. But Cameron, yeah, often says that. Massively over the top. Shouldn't do it. As a fan, I've learned so much over the years about your fantastic insight. Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much, Connor. And thank you for your super chats. Very kind. Another one. Anvil35. Australian media has been very hostile towards Lando and Zach. Do you expect hostile reception in Melbourne? Will the context of the Ashes matter? Well, I'm not sure Zach even knows what the Ashes are. Well, he knows what Ashes are. He doesn't know what the Ashes are. I'm sure he's got no idea, and nor would he care. So that's the first thing. Secondly, Lando probably does, but he probably thinks, well, you know, England got thrashed, but at least I won the World Championship, which is more than Elfyn Evans did or whatever. So Lando will go there. I mean, Lando's pretty used to being booed now, isn't he? It happens quite a lot, and I'm sure he's expecting it next year in Melbourne. And if he's not, somebody should let him lighten up or wise up to it. But I think as world champion, will he care? He didn't really care this year, did he? He's pretty good at that. And I don't think he'll care as world champion if they boo him every day, all day in Australia. And of course, Australians ultimately love sport. Yeah, they love Australians winning, and they don't really like whinging Poms. But equally, not that Lando whinges. And I think there will be a moment when they'll say, come on now, you know, give a bit of respect. When it's due, mate. Yeah, I mean, he did win it. And there will be some polite applause for Lando. I don't think we should worry about it too much. I'm not a fan of booing, as you know, only because not in itself, but I think one thing leads to another. And these days in this world, you don't want to encourage extreme behavior, and booing can lead to extreme behavior. So I hope, you know, it doesn't do that. And I hope we can get on top of it. But, you know, hostile towards Lando and Zach Brown. I mean, in a way, you could look at it and say, well, aren't they thanking them for giving Oscar that opportunity to go to McLaren and win Grand Prix the way he did early in his career? Big thanks to Zach Brown. Not so much, well, Lando too, kind of, you know, off the boil as much as he was when Oscar was winning. So, in a way, you should say, thanks, guys. But on the other side of the coin, they could say, you know, he was robbed. It's just typical human nature, isn't it? Nobody's ever happy. Especially when it's polarized like this and becomes nationalistic. Here we go. Luke Mifsud. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. In regards to weaving on the straights and picking a sidewall and braking zones, what's your opinion on this? Shouldn't they let them race harder? Well, yeah, absolutely. I can't stand all these stupid regulations for sporting infringements. But we seem to be like speed bumps. Once you've got them, they never go away, and we never go backwards, really. I know they had another meeting about it relatively recently. Where was it? That's after Qatar, I think, with the drivers and the FIA to talk about driving standards and how the regulations could change and the stewards' decisions that have been made and all that stuff. And is it an attempt to make it freer and to have fewer regulations, or is it an attempt to have even more regulations? You know, nobody really knows, and how it will pan out. And I don't, as I've said before, there are so many grey areas in every maneuver. Every car is different. Every driver is different in the way he drives. That you start trying to put these rules on the way people can move a car when they're in proximity to another. And to me, it's always going to end in tears, because you can never be fair. And it'll never be right. And as much as you can talk about the dangers of racing closely and making moves at the last minute or second or millisecond, if you look at the number of really serious accidents we've had in Formula One over the years, I'm going back to 1950 now, if you look at the number of accidents caused by two drivers running into one another, one of them setting up an accident and it ending in a really serious crash, it's a tiny percentage compared with the number of accidents caused by poor circuit design and or mechanical failure on the cars. So all this business of, we've got to improve driving standards, to what end is what I keep saying. We want it to be a show, we want it to be racing, we want these drivers out there doing what they do, overtaking on the inside or the outside, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And if you are an innocent party in that and you get taken out, kind of, all right, so be it. Not being hit by another car is as much a part of the racing driver's art as lapping another car well and effectively and defending an overtake well and effectively. All of these things are part of the driver's vocabulary. And as I've said before, Niki Lauda's basic philosophy of racing was, how do I make sure nobody ever hits me? That's the first thing. Then I want to be quick, and then I want to win every race. But the first thing is, I don't want anybody hitting my car. I'm always going to make sure I'm not hit. And Alain Prost adopted that philosophy from Niki in '84. And today it's like, this is my track. He's not allowed to break the rules. It's my corner. I'm going to do this. I'm going to pass him on the outside. Oh, he's run wide. It's his fault. He should get a penalty. It's pathetic. And it's taken away a lot of the heart and soul of being a racing driver, in my opinion. So if you go back to this whole Yuki Tsunoda, Lando Norris thing in Abu Dhabi, as I said before, I think it's a classic example of a guy like Yuki Tsunoda having absolutely no idea how to defend. No idea, because he's never had to do it. Because these rules that we've had in Formula One have always governed everything that you do, and the GPS has always governed the impeding when you're being lapped. So he doesn't know how to correctly defend. So all he did was weave and brake test, basically, under braking, which was, even if you're not going to get a penalty for it, it's a stupid thing to do, in my opinion. There's many more subtle and effective ways of defending a position for a lap or two. And he didn't do it. Basically, he didn't know how to. I kind of blame Red Bull there for not telling him, because I'm assuming that if they had told him or given him some ideas, he would have listened. But then again, maybe he wasn't going to listen. And it came over a little bit like that on the radio. Remember, Yuki, we talked about this, yeah, I know, don't talk to me, let me focus, I know what to do. Yeah, well, sorry, Yuki, you didn't know what to do and you blew it. So, but none of this would have been an issue if we didn't have all these stupid rules. And I really think it's wrong. And as I said a million times, Stirling Moss won the '61 Monaco Grand Prix, beating the much more powerful Ferraris in his little Lotus 18 climax. He beat them by perfect use of the back markers and when he was going to lap them and perfectly positioning the car. There was never a moment when there was a T-bone or there was shutting the gate. Everything was just perfectly timed just to make sure that there was a slow car between Stirling and a Ferrari just when the Richie Ginther or Phil Hill wanted to put the power on. Phil Hill. And that's one of the arts. It's judgment. It's assessing the pace of the car in front and the position that you're in and the upcoming corner and knowing exactly what to do and how quick the cars are behind. All of that is part of the brilliant judgment of racing drivers. And we're taking that away from them today ad nauseum with all these rules. EV King. Hi, Peter. What do you think about almost half the field running a Mercedes engine next year? Is it too many? Thank you for allowing us to ask questions. Very much appreciated. Well, it's a very good question. And I try not to think about it so much because I just think the whole engine regulations at the moment are completely ridiculous about customers and manufacturers and how some are allowed to get away with not having any customer teams at all. And others, like Mercedes, have to do all these other teams. And maybe I'm speaking from an era when only doing engines for yourself was a huge advantage. And it was always a pain having to do customer engines. And yet there's nobody's taking up the slack there for Mercedes. I don't understand it. Why Formula One has got into that position. And as Mark pointed out, even worse is that because Audi said we're not going to do this new regulation if we've got to do an MGUH. We don't have that anymore. So the normally aspirated side of, the internal combustion side of the whole power unit now is less efficient than it was last year, or is this year. Because of all that, we've got Audi, but now we've lost Renault. So what was it all about? I'd rather have Renault than Audi in Formula One, to be honest. Renault have got much more history in Formula One. Well, Audi got only Auto Union from early 1930s to 39. That was it. Bang, gone. Never to return. They've got that at least, I agree. But nothing like Renault's history. Nothing like it. And nobody seems to be shedding a tear for that. I am. I think Renault, very Chatillon, and the whole Renault engine thing, it's part of Formula One's fabric, and we've lost it. James Siro says we should have a point for pole. If the guy on pole cannot choose which side of the grid to be on, at least give him a point for putting it on pole. It's a good replacement for fastest lap. Well, I've got to say, I totally agree with you. I think that's a great suggestion, and I love your qualifier there. If we're not going to allow them to choose, and of course we should, and that's not going to happen. I don't know why. It's not difficult to do, and it'd be a really good moment when the pole winner, as he's being interviewed, they say, right, which side of the grid? And he has to make this decision. Everybody in the pit lane's waiting. All the fans of the world are waiting to see which side he says. It's just like, bat or bowl before a match. Which end do you want to serve from? It's no different. And but they're not going to do that. For whatever reason, they know best, and they're not going to do it. So it's a shame. But because of that, and you're absolutely right, I think it would be good if we did have a point for pole. I think you're absolutely right. And why not? Point for pole, mega. Just trying to think why they don't have a point for pole. There has to be some stupid reason, doesn't it? What would it be? What would it be? Practice? I don't know. I can't think of a reason why they wouldn't do it. Because they've never done it, I suppose. Would that be it? I disagree with Yuki penalty. If you watch Lando on board, you'll see when he moved, he was breaking Lando's toe. Breaking Lando toe. Ollie's penalty and the Stroll penalty, same thing. Stewart is smoking something hectic. Well, I mean, we'll all have our opinions about that. I just think that, the key thing for me was that Yuki came out of the power at a point where on the previous lap he was actually flat out, and that's really dangerous. That's a stupid, ridiculous, dangerous thing to do. It's the same as brake testing. You come out of the throttle at 300 kilometers an hour and the car is going to feel as if it's braking. You're going to be leaning forward in the belts for sure. And the minute he did that, Lando was just a passenger basically and just went left, and then Yuki countered that, and then Lando went off track to get him. And I think he was right to do that. And so maybe, he should have got a penalty for brake testing him. That's what he should have got a penalty for. That's the one thing I would give a penalty for, because I think that is the most dangerous thing you can do in motor racing. And I've always said the straights are today the most dangerous part of any racetrack, because there's nowhere to go. And if you back off with somebody right behind you at 300 kilometers an hour, that's an incredibly dangerous thing to do. So, backing off is tantamount to braking anyway. So we'll back off test. Lando's mum with a breath of fresh air to the usual Formula One crowd snobbery. Yeah, absolutely. Good on her. She was just there doing her thing her own way. None of that sort of glamour puss stuff. Yeah, excellent. Assassin 6540, hi Peter. Find your knowledge very insightful. I have two questions. Do you think Max has the best driving style, and which of the current rookie has the driving style closest to Max? I do think Max has the best driving style. I'm not sure style is the word I would use. I would use method, probably. He manipulates the car in a way that others don't, and he's constantly on top of the dynamic weights of the car. Sorry, you keep seeing, I keep adjusting this because the light's changing here. I haven't got a perfect studio, as you know. I'll stop fiddling around with that now. And he keeps he manipulates the dynamic weights of the car with perfect harmony with the rate of input that he has at his disposal through his hands and his feet. And that is the epitome of the art. The car is constantly subjected to dynamic weight the minute you're taking it out of a straight line, the minute you load it up. Even if you're moving from one side of the straight to the other, there's lateral G going through the car, through the engine, through the tires, through everything. And obviously the minute you start braking and turning into a corner, that is magnified. And there's all that dynamic weight, and dynamic is the key word here, because it's not just a force you can see in a straight line, it's a dynamic force. It's moving as the car is evolving through the corner, creating the corner, if you like. All those dynamic weights have to be managed if you want to keep the car stable and in a position to extend the straight you're on by not turning in too sharply initially, but getting in a little bit earlier, picking a rotation point where you've got to make sure you do that turning, that annoying bit of turning, in order to get the car onto the next straight, and doing that at the perfect moment, and then extending the straight ahead of you. And you can only do that if you perfectly manage all these dynamic weights. The analogy I keep using is the balls on a billiard table. If there's 4 of you on every corner, and you're trying to keep the balls in the center of the billiard table, and all the balls are running loosely. That is basically what Max is doing through his feet and his hands, and the rate at which you move the table, if you move it slightly faster or slightly slower, has a big impact on the speed at which a ball can roll from one side of the table to the other. It's the same in a racing car. If you move too abruptly, a dynamic weight is going to move in correction too quickly, and it's going to destabilize another dynamic weight. And so Max has this ability to make all of his inputs in perfect harmony with all the dynamic weight that's going on around him. And it's completely natural. He doesn't think about it, but he's done it for so long that he can now talk about it in such a way that the engineers can get feedback to enable them to improve the front or improve the rear or make it stiffer or make it softer to get what he wants. And that's what he does. Charles Leclerc does that. I mean, most drivers have that up to a point, but Max does it in a complete, perfect bubble around the car. And that's what makes him different. I think the driver that is alongside him next year is the young rookie with the most chance of reaching that sort of level over a period of time, Isaac Hadjar. I think he has that ability and he can do it. I think Kimi Antonelli, talking of rookies now, is not where Isaac is, but he's pretty good on slow corners at managing the dynamic weight in the way that Max does, with really good harmony. I don't think his harmonies are as good on medium or high speed corners in the case of Kimi Antonelli, and that's why he went off, I think, in Qatar. It was coming out of a left-hander, and he just, the car got away from him. It just, he didn't have enough management of the dynamic weight at that moment, because he's losing grip as well. So because this is a very natural thing, you can only talk about drivers that have this natural DNA anyway. And I don't think, say, Liam Lawson or Carlos Sainz have that in their DNA. They don't have that natural feel. If I am managing all these weights really well, what do I do with it? In Carlos Sainz's case, he just perfects what he does anyway. He just makes sure that he brakes as late as he possibly can without unsettling the car, then turns in as wide as he needs to in order to get the power on as soon as possible. So he's feeling the loaded rear on a right-hander, the left rear, and then he can get the power on in a really, really nice rate, beautiful rate, lovely throttle application. But he's actually taking quite a long corner compared with Max Verstappen, who's using that lovely touch actually to shorten the corner, by making the corner, the actual rotation bit, quite small and extending the straights either end of it, either side of that. And that's a great art that Nigel Mansell had, that Alain Prost had, that Jim Clark had, that Carlos Reutemann had, that Ayrton Senna did not have. He was the epitome of the Carlos Sainz corner that I've just tried to describe, which Michael Schumacher has. I mean, he was a short corner driver as well. Lewis Hamilton had up until 2021. I can't speak of Alberto Ascari or Achille Varzi or Bernd Rosemeyer because I never saw enough action pictures of them. I don't think Rosemeyer did, from what I've seen. I think he was fairly sort of Keke Rosbergish, Rosemeyer, or even Nico Rosbergish. But, and I think Rudy Caracciolo was pretty Niki Lauda. Alberto Ascari, I suspect, was, Sterling Moss, short corners, I suspect. Wellenvids. Okay, got you there. Sorry. Bring it up again. I clicked it because I was so amazed at... Yeah, here we go. Hi, Peter. Maybe a strange one. When racing wheel to wheel, a driver's driving the track with the other car in peripheral, or is it the other way around, the track in peripheral? Peter the goat. Well, I don't know about that. The goat, that is. When racing wheel to wheel, a driver's driving the track with the other car in peripheral, or is it the other way around? I've often asked drivers this, and I must say the answers have changed, or do change, from driver to driver, era to era. I mean, bear in mind, even today, you get a George Russell quite often saying, oh, he's bottoming a lot, or a lot of smoke coming from his, or always commenting about the car in front, or regularly commenting. So obviously they are looking at the car in front, but they also look very far ahead. And so, and there's no way a Max or a Charles could go into, at the end of the long straight in Abu Dhabi, into that chicane thing. There's no way Max could do what he does into that corner if he was looking at the car in front, even if he wasn't within DRS, even if it was like 100 meters ahead. He wouldn't be watching the car. He'd only be watching the corner, because that's how his body reacts to everything that needs to be done to manage the dynamic weight, in terms of how he brakes, where he comes out of the brake pedal pressure, all those things. So I suspect that once they've got the initial platform done correctly based on looking at the corner, they can then kind of not relax, but then they can sort of adjust the focus a bit and look at the car in front of them. I think that's probably what they do. I'm talking about the great drivers now. And that kind of stacks up in terms of the input you get from them when you talk to them about that they do them both at the same time, but they don't really. And I always come back to sorry for repeating this one, but my lap of Silverstone Grand Prix circuit with Jody Scheckter in some sort of Renault. It was a Renault 19 something or other, turbo mega Gordini thing, blue elf all over it, and it was pouring with rain, and we went out onto the Grand Prix circuit, and Jody was driving obviously, and by the time we got to Beckett's, exit of Beckett's, he still hadn't put the windscreen wipers on, and there was was rain everywhere. I said, Jody, are the wipers working on this thing? And he said, oh yes, I forgot, and put them on. And I asked him, I said, Jody, why did you drive Copse and Chapel and Beckett's without wipers? He said, oh, I never really noticed the rain on the windscreen. I'm always looking so far ahead. I don't see the rain on it. I was looking at, I was looking at Stowe as I was coming out of Beckett's. I don't see the rain. So there you go. That's how far ahead they're looking, to the point where they don't even notice the rain, unless it's blurry, of course, and or misted up. But in terms of drops of rain, he was seeing between the drops of rain to Stowe Corner. So try that on the road. Yeah. See how long you can. I better not say see how long you can go without turning the wipers on. Do that on a private field somewhere. Whelan says maybe a mix of both, I suppose. Well, yeah, basically what I've said, it is a mix of both, but it's not happening simultaneously. First of all, it's no, I need to see the corner, and then it's I need to look at this car. So it's that. Daniel Brodsky, I think Monza is crucial in 2025. You're talking about the World Championship, not because of the 3 points, but because psychologically Oscar should say no, and everything would be different. Well, should he say no? I mean, he was an Alpine race driver, don't forget. And then all of a sudden, Mark Webber's on the phone, or somebody's on the phone saying, you can be in a McLaren next year, mate. You haven't got a proper contract with Alpine. You can be racing a McLaren next year. Oh, yeah, do you reckon Zach could do that? Yeah, come on, let's go. We're going down there now. And Zach says, yeah, we can do this. We can do this. Let's make it happen. Yeah. But what about Daniel? No, don't worry. I'll sort out Daniel. No, I want you in a McLaren. Really? A McLaren? And then they're in the car going back to the airport. Mark, do you realise what this means? I could win a Grand Prix. I can win a Grand Prix if I go to McLaren. So now you're saying, this is the guy that Zach basically took from nowhere at Alpine, put in a McLaren. He's won all these Grand Prix, and now everyone's moaning that he didn't say no enough to Zach. The reason Oscar did what he did and behaved the way he did, which was extremely well, I think, behave well, is because he understands. He understands the order of things and how it is. And ultimately, he was lucky to be in a McLaren. Got to say it, you know, he's lucky to be in a McLaren because he was an Alpine race driver. Now, my point is, had he stayed at Alpine and hadn't been all that fuss about the license and leaving and the contract and everything else, sorry, the contract, not the license, then I think he would have blown Ocon away in 1 year. Everybody would have said Oscar is the greatest thing since whatever, and he's F2 champion or F3 champion. Now he's blown on Ocon away at Alpine. And I think he would have got Antonelli's drive and or Lewis's drive. So I don't think it saved his career as such. And he might well have won Grand Prix had he gone to Mercedes. So, but he went to McLaren. That was what he did. That was the team that first, you know, went for him. And he obviously does feel gratitude for that, I would say. Nissam. Zach said Oscar will be the next champion. How much do you think he will medal to make it happen? It would be good for the team's image to have 2 world champions but lower the World Drivers' Championship. I don't think he'll medal any more than he has this year. I mean, there will be medaling based on, it'll be less than ever before, but there'll be medaling still based on agreements about first corners, about this guy's on tyres that are fresher, let him pass, make a challenge. If he can't, we'll put the position back 1 lap from the end of the race. Or strategy call here, Oscar, we're going to bring you in first. I know it was going to be second, but that's only because we want to cover, blah, 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 blah. There'll be lots of that. And there'll be lots of argy-bargy as a result, and everyone will start moaning. But I don't think McLaren will do it as much as they have done, to be honest. I think there'll be a lot more open now. I mean, at the end of the day, Zach's won his championship with Lando. Lando could win it again if it's a great car. Oscar could win it. And I think if Oscar wins it, I don't think Lando or Zach are going to feel that bad about it. And equally, if Lando wins it again, they're going to be delighted. So I don't think everyone needs to be too stressed about that, to be honest. Arshad Chowdhury, hi there. Lando followed team orders in Hungary 24 for team's bad pit stop. So did Oscar in Monza 25. So why the big fuss? They're both team players. Anyway, we know who the best driver was for the past 5 years. 100% agree. 5-star endorsement of that point. Thank you very much indeed. And indeed, the driver that won the most races in 2025 actually is the winningest driver and the fastest driver and the best driver. And that is Maximilian Verstappen. Daniel, it's 6 points. I don't know what that is. Yeah. Anyway, there you go. You're all talking about what would have happened with the points in the championship. Flashheart, Max Flashheart says Super Formula is great. It is. Flashheart says I watched Lawson in Super Formula. Hard to watch here in New Zealand. Yeah, I bet it is. But I think they do quite a good job on the YouTube channel, don't they? Super Formula. I think they do every race. Japanese commentary, mega. I always listen to the Japanese commentary in World Rally Championship, actually, on Rally TV. I love the way they do that. They don't speak too loudly, and you can hear all the co-drivers' comments. That's the reason for it. So, yeah, I love the Japanese, the way they do it. Very dignified. And I used to watch Super Formula in the Pedro de la Rosa days, the Ross Chiva days before that, and certainly the Pierre Gasly days when he was reinventing himself over there and did such a great job. And obviously Liam Lawson went pretty well too. But Pierre Gasly was superb, particularly at Suzuka, as was Ross Chiba. If the post-season test lap times are anything to go by, says Gary, we are in for slow running next season. Seems like a step back to me. We want fast racing. Well, these are mule cars they're doing, but it's all pretty uninspiring, isn't it? And but maybe the answer is not to have any stopwatches or timing anymore. Just let them all go out, race into one another. Haddon is great. We're talking about rallying now. I totally agree with you there, and I'm so pleased that he's got that drive. Does Max have an out now that Marco is gone? If Max had wanted to leave Red Bull at any point in the last 5 years, and I can't imagine he would have wanted to do that, then I don't think Marco would have stood in his way, because it would only have been if there was a relatively logical thing for Max to do. and that would have been, I don't know what, he's got a McLaren option, and go and do it. I don't think Marco would have said, if Red Bull were absolutely terrible and McLaren had suddenly, at the end of last year, and Max had finished last in the championship, and McLaren had sacked Oscar Piastri after 1 year and said, we want Max Verstappen, I don't think Marco would have stopped that. I think he would have let him go. But what I'm saying is, I don't think it was ever an opportunity or moment when Max would have wanted to leave Red Bull right now, and I don't think he does at the moment. I think he wants to see what happens in 26 and then go forward. So I don't think that was the issue with Marco. I think it was just he's arguably done a very good job with the driver thing at Red Bull. He's arguably done a terrible job, depending on whether you want to look at Sebastian Vettel and Max Verstappen, and to some extent Isaac Hadjar, I guess, or look at all the drivers that he sponsored that have gone nowhere. And how much money that's cost Red Bull. They probably got it all back with Max, actually, so it's probably evened itself out pretty well. And I think Max is quite fond of Helmut, actually. I think he knows that Helmut was one of the guys that believed in him when he was in Formula 3 and gave him that opportunity under the terms that Max and Jos pushed for, and Helmut went along with them. And I think Max will see Helmut leaving as probably no problem, because it affected the young driver thing more than anything else. But equally, if Max wants to pick up the phone to Helmut at any point and get his input, I'm sure Helmut will be there to answer the phone. So in that sense, I don't think it'll change anything. So it's a horrible thing to say, says BB. I'm better because I'm a good person, implying every other world drivers champion is somehow not a good person. Is that what it is? I don't know if that's what he was trying to imply. I don't know. You've got to be so careful with these things in interviews. The interviewer questions, the out of context stuff. It's probably all rubbish just to cause trouble. I can't imagine that deep down Lando thinks that Max or Lewis or Nico are not good people. Why would he think that? He wouldn't. So if he's now been put in a position because of quotes that's what people think he thinks, then that's a poor reflection on the journalist in question, I think. I love Super Formula. Yeah, it's all happening now. Big hearts. We need to do something special about Super Formula next year. I don't know what. I used to have a mate who ran one of the teams there. I've forgotten his name now, though, and I haven't been in touch with him for about 5 years, so he probably won't return to my emails. But he would be the bloke to get all the inside stuff on how Cali's going and what's happening and what his team's like. I need to open some doors there again in Japan, see what's going up there. Will this win elevate Lando's driving performance in 26? As I said to Mark when we chatted about it, I think if it's a good car, yes, probably it'd be more relaxed, less tension, probably enjoy his driving even more and be very fluid and very good, particularly on a green track, cold tyres, not bad at all. If it's a bad car, probably not. I think he'll think, well, I won the championship, let Oscar drive this thing. This flick oversteer at 180 miles an hour, I don't need that every day. And so it could be a bit of that. And as I said to Cameron, I just really hope that Zach says, do you want to do Sebring? Do you want to do Daytona? Do you want to do Le Mans? Do you want to do a couple of rounds of the BTCC with my mate Alan Gow? Do you want to do this or that? And give the fans a chance to see Lando. Is he as good as Frank Gardner in a touring car? That's the big question. We all want to know. And there have been others. Jim Clark, let's say, not bad in the touring car either. Nigel Mansell, not bad in the British Touring Car Championship when he was there. So, and the other things, you can do a hill climb or something. And get an Indy Lotus and go do a hill climb. Get Lando sorted out. Or even a McLaren Indy car. Take it up the Ollon-Villa hill climb. Do some stuff that world champions can do because they're world champions. They can do whatever they want, really. But use it, and go and do some interesting stuff. I mean, Jimmy always did that. I'm 64. He was world champion, reigning world champion, 64 French Grand Prix. There's the Honourable Patrick Lindsay with his ERA. And Jimmy walks up after first practice for the Formula One race. He says, do you think I could take that car for a few laps in the lunch break? Lindsay looks at him and says, yeah, absolutely, be my guest. And Jimmy does, and goes immediately super quick in it, sideways everywhere, mega. And And so it goes on. I mean, Jimmy, what about that Felday 4-wheel drive 2-litre sports car? Brilliant car. Peter Westbury at his very best. 66. I don't think it was the BOEC 500. It was the Brands Hatch something or other, or the Guards Trophy or something. And there's Jimmy driving this 2-litre 4-wheel drive Felday because he wanted to know what 4-wheel drive felt like. And this is what we should let Lando do. He wants to know what a Rally 1 Ford Puma feels like sideways on a 120 mile an hour gravel road between the pine trees. Go for it. This is the world champion. Let him get out there, have some fun. And to be honest with you, that is how you'd let Lando just relax and become a really good all-round mega driver if you did that. Max Flashart says Honda PU might be up there for Aston Martin. Well, yeah, I think it will. That's the understatement of the year. I think it'll be more than right up there. It'll be ahead of everything. It's going to be a great engine. And I think the chassis is going to be, pretty darn good, as Dan Gurney used to say. Cam loves goats. He does. This is from Max. Cam loves goats. And ha, ha, ha. Yeah, well, right. Cam's a good bloke, though, isn't he? If anybody's a good person, it's Cam. So if you want to know what being a good person's all about, watch Cam's channel. Can we please get Mr. Windsor to 200,000 subscribers before the end of the 25? Thank you for your wonderful content, Peter. This is from Denise Summer Rock. How very kind of you, even to notice that. I'm completely blown away that you'd even know that I'm somewhere near 200. But I feel pretty insignificant alongside the other great YouTube channels out there. About which I know nothing at all, apart from that they have huge numbers, and I don't know what they're doing that I'm not. I like to think they're probably using a lot of footage that they're not supposed to be using, and that's part of the thing. And then probably doing a lot more other stuff outside Formula One. They're probably doing IndyCar and bikes and all the other stuff that generate fans. So anyway, I do what I do, and I love it, and I love having questions from you guys and lovely comments like this. Thank you very much. But please understand, I will not lose any sleep at all if I go to bed on Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve and we're still at 198 or whatever I'm at. It doesn't worry me at all. I just do. I've always, people who watch me on this channel probably know that I'm not into trending. I'm not into the hashtag. And if a guaranteed success of a video means talking about something in a way that I don't actually feel comfortable, I'm not going to do it because, I'm not that interested in it. I'm more interested in trying to say what I think is the right thing at any given moment. It sounds a bit pretentious to say that, but that's kind of the only way I can get up in the morning to do this. Anvil says, the GOAT PW answered my question. I can rest easy. I'm not quite sure what the question was, but I'm glad you did. Yes, 23 says, Peter, did you catch the radio of Lewis with Adami at Abu Dhabi? It was shocking. No, I didn't actually. I haven't listened to that yet. I must do so. I mean, Lewis is just, I just don't think now. Well, I do think if the Ferrari next year is as good as the McLaren is this year, I think Lewis will do a pretty good job with it. And he'll do about the same job Carlos Sainz would do if he was at Ferrari, which is if Charles winning races, Carlos / Lewis would win some races. Not as many as Charles, but would win some races. So he's quite capable of winning Grand Prix again. But I don't think he can ever be as good as Charles Leclerc now. I think the moment of him having the motivation to work as hard as he needs to work in order to be as quick as Charles, and I'm talking about the off season now and working on things like why he's turning in so late and why he likes to have the car relatively straight now when he's braking and all these things that he's been doing for the last 4 years, getting rid of all that so he gets back into being the Lewis that he was. I think it's too late for that. I mean, if the penny was going to drop with him, it would have dropped by now, and it obviously hasn't. And he's just hoping that the car's going to be good, and he's hoping that if he has a great winter and he just relaxes and doesn't think about Formula One and keeps really fit, that he's going to come back refreshed and ready to go. They love saying that, don't they? They've had refreshed, rebooted. What does that mean? If you can't hit a decent bunker shot, being refreshed and going to the gym isn't going to help you. The only thing that's going to help you is hitting 1,000 bunker shots till you get it right in a systematic way. And that's what Lewis needs to do, in my opinion. I don't think he will. Max says, everyone hit the like and sub button. Oh, thank you very much. Very kind. Emerald Isle says, happy Christmas to you and your family. Thank you very much. Yep, we've got lovely Christmas lights in our local city here. The family was there. The family was there actually when I was doing the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and video. They were all out at the Christmas lights, sending me pictures on WhatsApp. And there was I watching them drone around. Oh, no, I shouldn't say drone around. And yeah, but as I say, we're pretty flat out because Jack's doing a lot of tournaments right now as well. Emerald Isle says, slam dunk penalty for Yuki, and I wanted Max to win. Yeah, well. Easy Tweaks. Who said that Yuki did that brake test? Did you see the data? Well, I saw the data. He didn't brake test. He came off the throttle markedly earlier. Well, he wasn't coming off the throttle at all. Previous laps, he was flat out, and then he was just doing a pretty good overlap straight onto the brakes. And that was it. But on the lap that Lando was right behind him in the DRS, he earlier than that point, he comes out of the throttle, lets the car lose about 10 kilometers an hour, and then he does his braking thing. So that's the brake test. It wasn't a brake, as I say, it was coming out of throttle test, which is a huge deceleration at that speed. And then he moved. So he did two things. You're lucky not to get a double penalty, actually. Is there such a thing? So here we go. Lando was quick after his pit stop. Yeah, he was. He was good. He was pretty forceful and pretty quick after his pit stop. And bottom line, if Lando got a penalty, he still would have been world champion. Hi Peter, apologies if this is from Jez James. If you've read this out, was unsure as to why Red Bull didn't put Isaac in the number 2 car to try and get a second or third, so Max had a chance if he wins. So to do that, they would have had to have thought about that at least 3 races before Abu Dhabi, I think. You can't just sort of do that. There's quite a lot of, palaver. Then they'd have to actually be sure that Isaac's going to do a much better job than Yuki. And they don't know that, do they? Because evidence is that the Racing Bulls is probably a better car than the Red Bull anyway. So if you put Isaac in the Red Bull for the last race, would he have qualified higher than 10th? Probably. 8th, maybe. Would he have been in a different position in the race to Yuki? Maybe a little bit, but not that much. I don't think he would have been 3rd. I don't think he would have been ahead of George in that other Red Bull, or even Lando, or Charles. I don't think he would have beaten Charles, to be honest. Charles was very good. So, yeah, I don't think that was on, really. No, I don't think that was on. A lot of pressure on Isaac to have to do that. Then if you do that for one race, and the idea is that you've got to finish top 3 to beat Lando, I think Red Bull probably knew that car, that RB21, as good as Max was making it look on occasions, it wasn't actually that good. It wasn't as good as at Racing Bulls. So it was a dodgy thing to think of that. And Yuki probably told him that. Look, Yuki's probably been telling him that for the last 6 months. As part of his explanation as to why he's not been going well. This is going to have to be the last question, guys, because it's now 10 to 2 in Spain. I started when 11:30, so yeah, been going for a while. I've got a lot of stuff I've got to do now as well. Jack's got a couple of things. Hello, Peter. This is from Jithu. Hope you're having a nice day. Why does it feel like Fernando is still at the top of his game, but Lewis isn't at this stage? Is Fernando doing the homework more than Lewis? Love both. Well, I don't think Fernando's ever fallen off a peak of his driving in the way that Lewis did after Abu Dhabi 21 when he had the shock of the 22 Mercedes. Fernando's driven some pretty bad cars like the McLaren Honda, for example, but he never changed his style of driving. He's always exactly the same Fernando now that he was back in the Renault Championship days. That's one thing. And why is that? Well, I think it's because Lewis, as a 7 times champion and brand Lewis globally, has always had this thing of, I'll turn up on at the weekend and go racing, and then between races I'll go and do my other rest of my life. And Fernando's never really been like that, has he? He's just basically been a racing driver 24/7. So I think there is that. I mean, yeah, I mean, Lewis would not live the Fernando Alonso type life, I don't think. And then also Fernando's had to dig deep and occasionally drive for teams that he knows aren't going to be winning Grand Prix, and just because it's the only drive he's going to get. Aston Martin, good example. Or McLaren Honda when he went back there. And that's probably quite good for the soul of just knowing you got to keep driving and pushing, and one day it'll come right. And Lewis never really found himself in that position because he was always at Merck. And then at the back end of his career, for even more money and for even more glamour, he could go to Ferrari and become a global superstar of enormous proportions at Ferrari. Whereas Fernando went to Ferrari under different circumstances. It was more, he's a mega world champion. He's going to go there. He's going to win championships for Ferrari. And it didn't bring the best out in Fernando because it brought out the political side of him much more, because Ferrari is a very political team. And he got into a sort of, political infight with Massa and the two sides of the garage, and it all ended in tears. But that's not been Lewis's problem. Lewis's problem has almost been he's been too big and too famous. I mean, Fernando Alonso is not as famous as Lewis Hamilton. And that I think that has an effect. So as a result, Fernando's still super hungry, very political. And I guess that's another point. Lewis has never really been very political. He's just been a racing driver that gets on with it. He knows that he's got baggage in terms of who he is, where he's come from, his background, and he's had to live with that, and he's done that extremely well over his life, over his career. Whereas Fernando is a political guy. He'll always try to get the advantage of any situation and try to sometimes do it in a kind of political Machiavellian way. And so he's always had that ability, if that's the right word, that characteristic. Whereas Lewis is sort of struggling to deal with it now, I think. And Fernando has now found himself, for better or worse, he's found himself in a team where there's unbelievable financial backing. He's got Adrian Newey designing him a Grand Prix car, and he's got Honda engines. I mean, talk about nirvana for Fernando Alonso. The rest of the world, watch out now, because, he's just as good as he was before and quite capable of winning the World Championship next year. And on that note, thank you very much, everyone, for watching and your kind comments. And I hope you all have a wonderful, and this isn't a going away, you're not going to do any more stuff, but I just hope you have a wonderful next week and enjoying the holiday season if you're having one. If not, the build up to the holiday season, and wherever you are in the world, that you're safe and happy. So thanks for watching again. Take care.